Everyone told me to call them more. My neighbor Ruth, sweet woman, kind heart, terrible advice. She used to say, "Margaret, just pick up the phone. They're busy, but they'll answer." So I listened. I tried that for 2 years, calling more, waiting less, reaching out first. And you know what happens when you keep calling people who are too busy to call you back? You don't feel loved. You feel like a reminder, like something sitting quietly in the corner of their life that they know they should deal with, but never quite get around to. Like a bill, something that makes them feel guilty every time they see your name on their screen. And I didn't want to be a bill. I had spent 86 years being something real. A mother, a wife, a home. I wasn't about to spend whatever time I had left being something people avoid. So one day, I stopped calling. Not out of anger, not to punish them, but because I finally understood something. Because the truth is, I didn't stop calling them to change them. I stopped calling them because I was starting to lose myself. And that realization didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic moment where everything suddenly became clear. It came quietly, over time, through small observations that I had been ignoring for far too long. I began to notice how my days were shaped around waiting, not living, not doing, not experiencing, just waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for a message, waiting for a small sign that I was still part of their world in the way I used to be. And when you build your day around waiting, something strange happens. You stop being the center of your own life. You become an observer. I would wake up in the morning, and the first thing I would do wasn't make tea or open the curtains or step outside for fresh air. The first thing I would do was check my phone. Not because I had missed something, but because I hoped I had. That hope, it's a quiet kind of dependency. One that doesn't look like weakness from the outside, but slowly changes the way you see yourself. I told myself it was normal, that this is what happens when children grow older, when they build families of their own, when their priorities shift in ways you can't always be part of. And all of that is true. But there's another truth people don't talk about. Just because something is understandable doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. I remember one afternoon very clearly. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen, something I still take pride in even at my age, and I sat down with my tea like I always do. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful, but that day it felt different. I looked around and realized something that unsettled me. No one needed me anymore, not in the way they used to, and that's a difficult thing to accept, especially when your entire life has been built around being needed. When your value has always been connected to what you do for others, how you care for them, how you show up for them without question. Because when that disappears, you start asking yourself a question you never thought you would need to answer. Who am I without them needing me? That question stayed with me for days. And instead of answering it, I did what most people do. I distracted myself. I called my daughter. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I didn't call again. Not that day, not the next. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to try again. Not because I didn't care, but because something inside me had shifted. I realized that love shouldn't feel like something you have to chase. It shouldn't feel like something that only exists when you reach for it. And most importantly, it shouldn't make you feel smaller. That's when I began to understand the difference between connection and dependence. Connection is natural. It flows both ways. It doesn't need to be forced or maintained through effort alone. But dependence is when your emotional state starts relying on someone else's actions, whether they call, whether they reply, whether they remember you. For a long time, I didn't realize how much of my emotional state had quietly started depending on those small things, those simple moments that once felt natural, but had slowly turned into something I waited for, something I needed in ways I didn't want to admit. And the truth is, I had slowly become dependent without even realizing it. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that anyone else would notice or point out, but in a quiet, internal way that changes how you experience your own life. The kind of dependence that doesn't ask for attention, but slowly reshapes your thoughts, your routines, and your sense of self. That was the part I couldn't ignore anymore. So instead of continuing to reach outward, instead of waiting for something that I could no longer control, I made a decision that felt unfamiliar at first, almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. I turned inward. And I'll be honest with you, that wasn't easy. Because when you stop filling your time with other people, when you stop measuring your day by their responses, their presence, their attention, you are left with something most people spend their lives avoiding: yourself, your thoughts, your habits, your patterns, your reality without distraction. And at first, that kind of silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like standing in a room you've lived in your whole life, but somehow no longer recognize. I didn't know what to do with the time, not because I didn't have options, not because there was nothing to do, but because I had spent so long adjusting to other people's schedules, other people's priorities, other people's availability, that I had quietly forgotten how to choose for myself. That might sound strange, but it's true. When you spend too long reacting to others, when your actions are shaped by when someone calls, when someone replies, when someone has time for you, you slowly lose the habit of making independent decisions, even small ones. What do I want to do today? What do I feel like eating? Where do I want to go? These are simple questions, questions that should come naturally. But for me, they didn't. They felt unfamiliar, almost like I was asking something I didn't have the right to decide anymore. And that realization was heavier than I expected. So I didn't try to fix everything at once. I started small. One morning, without planning it, without telling anyone, without giving it too much thought, I put on my shoes and stepped outside for a walk. No destination, no purpose, no reason that needed to be explained, just walking. And as I moved through the same street I had known for years, past the same houses, the same trees, the same quiet corners that had always been there, I began to notice something that felt both obvious and surprising at the same time. Nothing had changed. The world outside was exactly the same as it had always been. The same light, the same air, the same rhythm. The only thing that had changed was me, or more accurately, the way I had been living inside that world. That thought stayed with me, not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but quietly, in the background, like something waiting to be understood. And over the next few days, I began to rebuild something I didn't even realize I had lost. A sense of ownership over my own life, not in a dramatic, life-changing way, but in small, consistent choices that slowly started to add up. I started reading again, not because I needed to pass time, not because I was trying to distract myself, but because I genuinely wanted to sit with something that belonged to me, something that didn't depend on anyone else's presence or response. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed, meals that took time, meals that I could sit with and appreciate, instead of quick things I would eat absent-mindedly while checking my phone. I sat outside in the evenings and watched the light fade slowly, noticing how peaceful that moment could be when it wasn't interrupted by expectation. And slowly, very slowly, something began to shift. The waiting that had once filled my days started to fade. Not completely, not all at once, but enough that it no longer controlled how I felt. Enough that I could go through a day without constantly checking my phone, without measuring my worth by whether someone reached out to me. And then something happened that I didn't expect. The silence stopped feeling empty. It stopped feeling like something was missing. And instead, it started to feel peaceful again. That's when I understood something that I wish I had understood much earlier in my life. Loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's about being disconnected from yourself. And for a long time, without realizing it, I had been more disconnected from myself than from anyone else. A few weeks after I stopped calling, my son finally called me. His voice sounded normal, casual, unchanged, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom, just checking in." And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel that rush of relief I used to feel. I didn't feel like I needed to hold on to that moment, to stretch it, to make it last longer than it naturally would. I simply answered, calmly, naturally, present. We talked for a few minutes, nothing deep, nothing emotional, just a normal conversation. But something about it felt different, not because of what he said, but because of how I felt. I wasn't holding on to the conversation. I wasn't trying to extend it. I wasn't searching for hidden meaning in his words. I was simply there. And when the call ended, I didn't sit there wishing it had lasted longer. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel like something had been taken away. I simply put my phone down and continued with my day. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything for me. I hadn't lost my children. I had just lost balance. And now, I was slowly finding it again. I still love them. That never changed. I still care about their lives, their happiness, their well-being. I still answer when they call. But I no longer build my life around their attention. And that one change changed everything. Because when you stop chasing, you start standing. And when you stand in your own life, when you begin to live without constantly reaching outward, people begin to see you differently. Not as someone who is always available, not as someone who will always reach first, but as someone who has their own life, their own rhythm, their own presence that doesn't depend on anyone else. And strangely enough, that's when the connection started to feel real again. Not forced, not one-sided, not something that needed to be maintained through effort alone. Just natural. I'm not going to tell you that your children will suddenly change. They might not. Life is complicated. People are busy. Priorities shift. That's reality. But what I will tell you is this. Don't shrink yourself trying to fit into someone else's schedule. Don't reduce your worth to how often someone calls you. And don't confuse silence with rejection. Sometimes it's just distance. And distance doesn't have to take anything away from who you are. I'm 86 years old, and I've learned something that I wish I had understood much earlier. You can love people deeply without losing yourself in the process. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back, not to make them notice you, but to finally see yourself clearly again.